Welcome to Pastor's Chat today. Well, it's good to be back in my home office here in Sneads Ferry, North Carolina, after a brief trip to the Holy Land with a great group of young people and their parents as we walked where Jesus walked and learned more about our Savior and His love for us and His ministry of the cross and His ministry of salvation and redemption. Well, I love reading the Psalms. I love sharing from the Psalms on these pastor chats, and I hope you're learning with me because, boy, I'm sure learning a lot as we look at these Psalms. Matter of fact, today we're going to finish book one. When I say finish, we're going to begin to finish book one of the Psalms, which is chapter 1 through chapter 41. Now, when you look at these last four chapters of book 1, that's Psalm 38, 39, 40, and 41, you find that they all come out of the same circumstances. David is the author of this psalm, as we read even in the introduction to the chief musician, a Psalm of David. So David, again, is writing this psalm as he does all the previous psalms in this first book. Now we also are learning that these psalms, especially these last four psalms, are coming out of the heart of David as he is having to deal with the circumstances surrounding his sin with Bathsheba, the murder of her husband Uriah. And we had the opportunity just a few weeks ago to stand on the citadel in Amman, Jordan, and look down to probably the place where Uriah met his untimely death because of David's desire to cover up his sin with Uriah's wife Bathsheba. Now, that's what's behind all these Psalms, especially 38, 39, 40, and 41. David sinned. He committed adultery. He committed the sin of murder. And then he has to spend the rest of his life dealing with it. But by God's grace, he does. And by God's grace, he finds forgiveness. But at the same time, the consequences are terrible. It appears David gets physically sick. David is having to deal with that. As a result of that physical sickness, he can't rule as he should rule over the nation of Israel. His son Absalom takes advantage of this because Absalom has a problem with his dad. And maybe we all know how, as fathers, and many fathers deal with rebellious sons. Matter of fact, Franklin Graham at one time was a rebellious son, but God's grace redeemed him and brought him back to the Lord. And it's a wonderful testimony. Even Billy Graham had to deal with a rebellious son who later is able to take his ministry to even greater heights as he ministers to the world. We see David in this psalm, as the background of this psalm, he has been sick. His son Absalom takes over, tries to rebel against him and raises a rebellion, because as you read to the Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, especially 2nd Samuel, the stories behind this psalm, David is sick and his son Absalom is raising an army, goes around saying, hey, let me listen to your problems. David doesn't have time. He's sick. And at the same time, Absalom is upset because his brother Amnon, remember, raped his half-sister Tamar, David's daughter, and as a result, Absalom kills Amnon. Now, how could David deal with Amnon, who committed the sin of adultery and incest with his daughter? How could he deal with that when he had committed the sin of adultery by Bathsheba? And then Amnon is murdered by Absalom. How could David deal with the sin of murder that Absalom commits against his own brother, Amnon, his half-brother? Why? Because David had committed the sin of murder. It's awful hard to deal with the sins of others when you yourself know that you have sinned. David's in a mess. And so what does David do? He cries out to the God of heaven for mercy, and thank God he finds it. In this psalm, you see a messianic flavor, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the next few days, when he writes, even my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. That's a reference to Ahithophel, which is a messianic reference in prophecy, how Jesus had a Judas, his familiar friend, who turned against him and betrayed him, and then went and hung himself, just as Ahithophel, after he is caught and found out, he hangs himself. Oh, what a psalm. So let's read the first verse. Blessed is he who considers the poor. The Lord will deliver him in the time of trouble. Wow, what an introduction to a psalm, the last psalm of the first book of Psalms. And we'll talk more about these things tomorrow. Well, God bless you. Thank you for coming back to be a part of Pastor's Chat. And I trust you'll read the entire psalm in its setting with a little bit of this background and listen to the Lord speak to our hearts as we learn to deal with our issues in the midst of the storms of our lives and asking God for help in the time of need. God bless, and you have a wonderful, wonderful day.